The laughter started the moment Sarah Mitchell walked into the warehouse in downtown Chicago, her worn sneakers squeaking slightly on the concrete floor as she approached the registration table where 15 men in tactical gear and expensive workout clothes turned to stare at her like she had just walked into the wrong building. She was holding a crumpled piece of paper with the address for the Titan Security Bodyguard Tryouts, her other hand clutching the strap of a faded backpack that had seen better days, and she knew exactly what they were seeing. A 32-year-old woman in discount store jeans and a plain gray hoodie, with dark circles under her eyes from working double shifts, and her light brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, looking more like someone who should be dropping off a resume at a coffee shop than someone trying out for one of the most elite security positions in the country. The biggest guy in the group, a mountain of muscle who had to be at least 6'5" and 270 pounds of pure intimidation, actually elbowed his buddy and pointed at Sarah with a grin that showed too many white teeth, not even bothering to lower his voice when he said that this was going to be entertaining, that maybe she thought this was a tryout for a secretarial position, and the whole group erupted in laughter that echoed off the high warehouse ceiling and made Sarah's jaw tighten just slightly. Just enough that if anyone had been watching her eyes instead of dismissing her entirely, they might have seen something dangerous flicker in those tired hazel depths. The man at the registration table, a grizzled former military type with a clipboard and a name tag that read Jenkins, looked Sarah up and down with barely concealed skepticism and asked if she was sure she was in the right place, because this was a tryout for executive protection specialists for Marcus Blackwell, the billionaire tech CEO who had received multiple death threats and needed the absolute best of the best, not just anyone who walked in off the street. Sarah met his gaze steadily and said in a quiet voice that still somehow carried authority that yes, she was in the right place, and yes, she had submitted an application 3 weeks ago that should be in his system under Sarah Mitchell. Jenkins scrolled through his tablet with a frown, clearly not expecting to find anything. But then his eyebrows went up slightly and he nodded, checking her name off the list and handing her a number card that read 16, while telling her the tryouts would begin in 10 minutes and that she should warm up and prepare for physical assessment, combat scenarios, and tactical evaluation. Sarah took the number and walked past the group of men who were still snickering, finding a quiet corner of the warehouse where she set down her backpack and began stretching with movements that were economical and precise, muscle memory, from years of training that her body hadn't forgotten, even if most people looking at her now would never guess what she was capable of. The warehouse had been set up like an obstacle course mixed with a combat training facility, with climbing walls and rope challenges on one side, padded sparring mats in the center, and what looked like a shooting range and tactical scenario area on the far end. There were about 20 candidates total, and Sarah was the only woman, a fact that became increasingly obvious as the men started showing off for each other, doing elaborate warm-up routines and comparing stories about their backgrounds in private military companies, former special forces, ex-Navy SEALs, professional fighters. The big guy who had made the comment about Sarah earlier was named Derek Stone, and he was holding court in the center of the group, his arms the size of tree trunks crossed over a chest that looked like it had been carved from granite, telling everyone about his 6 years as a Marine and his 3 years working security for celebrities and politicians, his voice booming with confidence that came from being the biggest, strongest person in almost any room he entered. His buddy, a lean guy with a shaved head and cruel eyes named Kyle Morrison, kept glancing over at Sarah and making comments just loud enough for her to hear about how this was a waste of time, how Titan Security shouldn't even allow applications from people who clearly couldn't handle the physical requirements, how someone was going to get hurt when they tried to compete beyond their capabilities. Sarah ignored them all, focusing on her stretches and breathing, centering herself the way she had been taught a lifetime ago, letting the comments wash over her without response, because she had learned long ago that words from insecure men meant nothing, that the only thing that mattered was what you could actually do when it counted. She thought about her daughter Emma, 7 years old and probably sitting in Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment right now owing homework, and she thought about the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter and the eviction notice that had been posted on her door 3 days ago. And she thought about how this job, if she could somehow get it, paid $200,000 a year plus benefits, and would mean Emma could stay in her school and Sarah could stop working 3 jobs just to barely make rent. She thought about all of this and let it fuel her. Let it sharpen her focus until everything else fell away except the knowledge that she was going to do whatever it took to prove she belonged here, regardless of what anyone else thought. A door at the far end of the warehouse opened, and 3 people walked out, immediately commanding attention just by their presence. The first was a tall black woman in her 40s with short natural hair and the kind of posture that screamed military officer, wearing tactical pants and a tightened security polo shirt, her eyes scanning the candidates with the assessing gaze of someone who had seen combat and knew exactly what to look for in a fighter. The second was a compact Asian man who moved with the fluid grace of a martial arts master, his expression neutral but his eyes missing nothing as he walked to the center of the sparring mats. The third was Marcus Blackwell himself, the billionaire CEO whose face had been on the cover of Forbes and Time magazine, tall and distinguished at 45 with dark hair, just starting to gray at the temples, wearing expensive casual clothes that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, and carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had built a tech empire from nothing and was now worth an estimated $12 billion. The woman introduced herself as Commander Patricia Hayes, former Navy and current head of recruitment for Titan Security, and she explained in a no-nonsense voice that today's tryouts would test physical capability, combat skills, tactical thinking, and the ability to protect a client under pressure, that they would be starting with basic physical assessment and then moving into increasingly difficult scenarios, and that most of them would not make it past the first round. The physical assessment was brutal, designed to weed out anyone who wasn't in peak condition, consisting of a timed obstacle course that included climbing, crawling under barriers, carrying heavy weights, and completing it all in under 3 minutes. The men went first, and most of them made it through, though several were clearly struggling by the end, their breathing labored and their muscles shaking. Derek Stone completed it with time to spare, making a show of his strength by practically throwing the weighted bags around and finishing with a flex and a grin toward his buddies. When Sarah's number was called, she heard the whispers start again, the barely concealed bets about how quickly she would give up, how she probably wouldn't even make it over the first wall. She stepped up to the starting line, and Commander Hayes looked at her with an expression that was carefully neutral, giving nothing away, and said that the timer would start on her mark. Sarah nodded once, and when Hayes said go, she exploded into motion with a speed that caught several people off guard, hitting the first wall at a run and scaling it with efficient movements that wasted no energy, her arms pulling her up with strength that didn't match her slim frame, dropping down the other side and rolling to absorb the impact before sprinting to the next obstacle. She moved through the course like water flowing downhill, taking the most efficient path, using technique where the men had used brute strength. And when she reached the weighted bag carry section that had slowed down even some of the bigger candidates, she hefted the 60-pound bags with proper form and a core strength that came from years of functional training, not just gym muscles. She finished the course in 2 minutes and 41 seconds, which was faster than all but 3 of the candidates, and when she crossed the finish line, her breathing was controlled and steady, not the gasping heaves that most of the others had shown. The warehouse had gone quiet, the smirks replaced by surprised expressions, and Derek Stone's arms had uncrossed as he watched Sarah walk back to her corner with the same quiet composure she had shown from the beginning. Commander Hayes made a note on her tablet and announced that 16 candidates had passed the physical assessment and would move on to combat evaluation. And Sarah's number was on the list, while 4 of the men who had been laughing earlier were told to collect their things and leave. The combat evaluation was where things got serious, where the real fighters would separate from the pretenders. Commander Hayes explained that each candidate would face off against one of Titan Security's current bodyguards in a controlled sparring match, that the goal was not necessarily to win to demonstrate technique, composure under pressure, and the ability to protect yourself and others. The compact Asian man stepped onto the mat and introduced himself as Chen, former Marine Corps martial arts instructor and current senior trainer for Titan Security, and his movements as he demonstrated the rules made it clear that he was extremely dangerous despite his smaller size. The matches began, and they were intense. Chen and 2 other Titan Security trainers systematically testing each candidate's skills. And while several of the men held their own and showed decent training, none of them managed to land a significant strike, and 2 were taken down so quickly and decisively that it was almost embarrassing. Derek Stone lasted longer than most, using his size and strength to stay defensive, but Chen eventually got past his guard and put him on the ground with an arm lock that had Derek tapping out. And when he stood up, there was frustration in his eyes and a new wariness as he looked at the trainers. Sarah was called up last, and she stepped onto the mat to face Chen while trying to ignore the renewed whispers, the commentary from some of the candidates about how this was going to be quick, how Chen was going to go easy on her, and she would still probably get hurt. Chen looked at Sarah with eyes that were professional and assessing, and he asked if she had any martial arts training, and Sarah said simply yes, not elaborating, and something about the way she said it made Chen's eyes narrow slightly with interest. They began circling each other, and Chen tested her with a few quick jabs that Sarah deflected easily, her guard tight and her footwork balanced, and then Chen increased the pressure, throwing combinations that would have overwhelmed most of the other candidates. But Sarah moved with them, blocking and redirecting, not trying to overpower but using angles and timing. And suddenly she saw an opening and struck, a fast, precise kick to Chen's supporting leg that buckled his knee just slightly, followed by a spinning movement that got behind his guard, and her hand was at his throat in a strike she pulled at the last second while her other hand controlled his arm. And if it had been real, Chen would have been unconscious or worse. The warehouse was dead silent as Sarah stepped back and dropped her guard, bowing slightly in respect the way martial artists do, and Chen was staring at her with an expression of genuine surprise mixed with growing respect. He asked where she had trained, and Sarah hesitated for just a moment before saying quietly that she had some military background, and Chen nodded slowly and said that was obvious. That was some of the best technique he had seen in years, and did she want to continue, or was she satisfied with the demonstration? Commander Hayes stepped forward before Sarah could answer, and said that she thought they had seen enough, that it was time to move to the tactical scenarios, and the way she was looking at Sarah had changed completely, the skepticism replaced by intense interest and calculation. Derek Stone was staring at Sarah like he was seeing her for the first time, his earlier smugness completely gone, and Kyle Morrison had shut his mouth entirely, no longer making comments about people competing beyond their capabilities. The tactical scenario was the final test, designed to evaluate not just fighting ability, but the ability to think under pressure and actually protect a client. Commander Hayes explained that each candidate would be placed in a scenario where they had to escort a VIP, played by Marcus Blackwell himself, from point A to point B, while trainers acted as potential threats, everything from aggressive photographers to actual attackers, and the candidates would be judged on their awareness, their decision-making, and their ability to keep the client safe without causing unnecessary harm or escalation. The scenarios were run one at a time, and they were chaotic and stressful, with loud noises and multiple people converging on the candidate and the VIP from different directions. And most of the candidates struggled, either becoming too aggressive and manhandling people who turned out to be harmless, or failing to spot the actual threats until it was too late. Derek Stone did better than most, using his size to physically shield Marcus and bulldozing through the crowd, but he missed one of the trainers coming from behind and would have failed if the scenario had been real. When Sarah's turn came, Marcus Blackwell looked at her with undisguised curiosity. This woman who had just shocked everyone by holding her own against Chen and showing skills that seemed impossible for someone in discount store clothes with tired eyes. The scenario started, and Sarah immediately positioned herself at Marcus's shoulder, not in front blocking his path but close enough to intercept any threat, and her eyes were constantly moving, scanning faces and hands and body. Language, spotting the first fake photographer before he even started moving and redirecting Marcus away from him. Identifying the actual threat among the crowd of 3 people approaching, because his gait was different and his hands were positioned wrong. And when he made his move, she was already there, intercepting him and using a control hold that immobilized him without injury, while verbally commanding the crowd to back away in a voice that carried absolute authority. She moved Marcus through the scenario like she had done this 1,000 times before, anticipating threats before they materialized, maintaining perfect situational awareness. And when it was over and Commander Hayes called time, Marcus was completely safe and Sarah hadn't even broken a sweat. And the impressed expression on Marcus's face said everything about how rare that level of performance was. Commander Hayes called all the remaining candidates together and said that they had seen some impressive skills today, that Titan Security would be making their decision within 24 hours and would contact the successful candidates directly, and that everyone should be proud of making it as far as they did because the washout rate for these tryouts was usually over 90%. She dismissed the group, and the candidates started gathering their things and heading out, most of them shooting glances at Sarah with a mixture of respect and confusion, still trying to figure out who this woman was and where she had learned to move like that. Derek Stone approached Sarah as she was putting on her worn jacket, and his earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by grudging respect and curiosity. He said that he had underestimated her, that he wanted to apologize for the comments earlier, and that wherever she had trained must have been serious because that was some impressive work. Sarah accepted the apology with a small nod and said nothing else, slinging her backpack over her shoulder and heading for the door, just wanting to get back to Emma and pretend for a few hours that she was just a normal single mom and not someone carrying the weight of a past that seemed determined to follow her no matter how far she ran. She had almost made it to the exit when she heard her name called, and she turned to see Marcus Blackwell himself walking toward her with Commander Hayes and Chen flanking him. And Marcus had an expression on his face that was thoughtful and intense. He asked if she had a few minutes to talk, and Sarah hesitated because she needed to relieve Mrs. Rodriguez, who was watching Emma. But something about the way Marcus was looking at her made her say yes, and she followed the 3 of them into a private office area that had been set up in the corner of the warehouse. Marcus gestured for her to sit, and she did, perching on the edge of the chair like she might need to run at any moment, and Marcus settled into the chair across from her, while Hayes and Chen stood behind him like the professional bodyguards they were. Marcus said that he was going to be direct, that what he had just seen from her was exceptional, that in his 5 years of working with Titan Security, he had never seen a candidate perform that well across all 3 evaluations, and that he wanted to know who she really was because someone with her skills didn't just appear out of nowhere working minimum wage jobs and trying out for security positions like she had nothing to lose. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes focused on a point just past Marcus's shoulder, and when she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. She said that her name was Sarah Mitchell, that she was a single mother raising a 7-year-old daughter in a 1-bedroom apartment on the south side of Chicago, that she worked as a waitress at a diner, stocked shelves at a grocery store overnight, and did data entry from home when she could find the work, and that she needed this job because she was 3 months behind on rent, and her daughter deserved better than the life Sarah was currently able to provide. She said all of this in a flat tone that didn't invite pity, just stated facts, and Marcus listened without interrupting. But his eyes said he knew she was leaving out the most important parts of her story. He waited until she was done and then asked the question that she had been dreading. What was her military background, and why wasn't it on her application? Sarah's hands tightened in her lap just slightly, and she said that her military service had ended 8 years ago, and she didn't think it was relevant. And Marcus's expression said he knew that was a lie, but he wasn't going to push, at least not yet. Commander Hayes stepped forward and said that they had done a background check on all the candidates as part of the application process, standard procedure, and that Sarah's had come back clean but also curiously thin, like someone who had lived a very quiet life with very little documentation, and that was usually a red flag suggesting either identity issues or someone actively trying to hide their past. Hayes said this without accusation, just as an observation, and she asked Sarah directly if there was anything they needed to know that might affect her ability to do this job, or that might put Marcus at risk if they hired her. Sarah met Hayes's gaze and said that there was nothing in her past that would put Marcus at risk, that she had no criminal record and no outstanding warrants, and that everything she had told them was true even if it wasn't complete. Hayes and Marcus exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them, and then Marcus said that he was going to make an unusual offer, that he was prepared to hire Sarah as his personal bodyguard effective immediately, but that the offer came with conditions, the first being that she needed to be completely honest with him about her background and capabilities, and the second being that she needed to understand that his life was genuinely in danger, and he needed to be able to trust the person protecting him with everything. The silence that followed was heavy with tension and possibility, and Sarah felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her like a physical thing. She thought about Emma, about the eviction notice, about the life she had been trying to build from the ruins of who she used to be, and she thought about the secrets she had been keeping for 8 years, secrets that she had sworn she would take to her grave, because revealing them would mean admitting that the past decade of her life had been a lie. But she also thought about the look on Emma's face when Sarah had to tell her they might have to move again, the fear and disappointment in those innocent eyes, and she thought about the $200,000 salary and what that would mean for her daughter's future, and she made a decision that would change everything. She looked Marcus Blackwell directly in the eyes and said that if she told him the truth, she needed his word that it would remain confidential, that it wouldn't go beyond the people in this room. And Marcus didn't hesitate before agreeing, and Commander Hayes and Chen nodded their agreement as well. Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice steady but quiet, and she told them that her name wasn't always Sarah Mitchell, that 8 years ago she had been Captain Sarah Chen of the United States Army, and the reason her background check came back thin was because most of her military record was classified and sealed. She told them that she had spent 6 years in the Special Forces, that she had been part of an elite unit that did the missions that didn't officially exist, the ones that never made the news because they took place in countries where America wasn't supposed to have boots on the ground. She told them about operations in the Middle East and Eastern Europe and parts of Africa that she still couldn't name, about learning to fight and survive and blend into any situation, about becoming one of the best close protection specialists in her unit, because her small frame and female appearance meant targets never saw her as a threat until it was too late. She told them about the language training and the tactical courses and the psychological conditioning that taught her to stay calm under pressure that would break most people. And she told them all of this in a voice that was matter of fact, not boasting, just explaining who she had been before everything fell apart. Then her voice changed, becoming quieter and more pained, and she told them about the mission that ended her career, an operation in Syria that had gone catastrophically wrong when intelligence failed, and her unit walked into an ambush. She told them about watching men she considered brothers die in front of her, about fighting their way out against impossible odds, about the shrapnel wound in her side, and the bullet that had grazed her skull, and the 3 days of evading enemy forces before extraction finally came. She told them about waking up in a military hospital in Germany and being told that she was being honorably discharged due to her injuries and the psychological trauma, about the PTSD diagnosis and the nightmares and the way loud noises made her reach for weapons that weren't there anymore. She told them about coming home to find that her fiancé, another soldier she had been planning to marry, had been killed in a different operation while she was recovering, and about learning 2 months later that she was pregnant with his child, with Emma, the only piece of him she had left. She told them about the spiral that followed, about the depression and the anger, and the feeling that she didn't fit anywhere in civilian life, about how the skills that had made her valuable in the military were useless in a world where people wanted you to smile and make small talk and pretend that everything was fine. She told them about changing her name legally after Emma was born, using her mother's maiden name Mitchell instead of Chen, because she wanted a fresh start and because she didn't want anyone from her past life finding her, didn't want Emma growing up with a mother who was defined by violence and trauma. She told them about the minimum wage jobs and the struggle to make ends meet, and the way she had to hide who she really was because employers got nervous when they learned about her military background, about the PTSD, about the fact that she was trained to kill in dozens of different ways. And she told them that she had really tried to be normal, to be just Sarah Mitchell, the single mom, but that the rent didn't pay itself and Emma deserved better. And when she had seen the ad for Titan Security Bodyguard tryouts, something had sparked in her for the first time in years, the knowledge that maybe there was a place where her skills actually mattered, where what she had been through could be worth something. When she finished, the office was silent except for the distant sounds of the warehouse being cleaned up, and Sarah sat there with her hands still clasped in her lap, feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way she hadn't felt since those first therapy sessions 8 years ago. Marcus was looking at her with an expression that was hard to read, a mixture of sympathy and respect and calculation, and Commander Hayes had sat down at some point during Sarah's story, her military bearing softened by understanding that could only come from someone who had seen similar things. Chen was nodding slowly, like pieces of a puzzle were finally clicking into place, and he said quietly that he had known she had real training, that the way she moved was too clean and too efficient to be anything else, but that he hadn't expected special forces, hadn't expected someone with her level of experience. Marcus finally spoke, his voice gentle in a way that suggested he understood more than Sarah had expected about trauma and loss and trying to rebuild a life from ruins. He said that he appreciated her honesty, that what she had shared wouldn't leave this room, and that if anything, it made him more confident in his decision to offer her the position, because he needed someone who had been tested in real combat situations, who knew what it meant to protect someone when lives were actually on the line. But then Marcus's expression became more serious, and he said that he needed to be equally honest with her about why he needed protection and what she would be walking into if she accepted this job. He told her that 3 months ago, his company TechCore had released a whistleblower report about a massive data breach affecting millions of users, and that the breach had been traced back to a criminal organization operating out of Eastern Europe that was now threatening him personally, because the exposure had cost them hundreds of millions of dollars in illicit revenue. He told her about the death threats that had started arriving, detailed messages describing how they would kill him and make it look like an accident, about the suspicious car that had followed him for 3 days before his current security team spotted it, about the package that had been intercepted at his office containing materials for a bomb. He told her that the FBI was involved, but that they couldn't provide 24-hour protection, that he needed private security who could be with him constantly, and that 2 of his previous bodyguards had quit after their families were threatened, unwilling to take the risk no matter how much he paid them. Marcus looked at Sarah with complete seriousness and said that he needed to know if she was ready to potentially put her life on the line, to face the kind of danger that was real and immediate, and to do it while also being a mother to a 7-year-old who needed her. He said that he would understand completely if she decided it was too much risk, that he wouldn't judge her for walking away, but that if she stayed, he needed her full commitment because half measures would get them both killed. Sarah didn't hesitate this time, her voice firm when she said that she had faced worse in Syria and Afghanistan, that danger wasn't new to her, and that if anything, having Emma made her more committed, not less, because her daughter deserved a mother who could provide for her and protect her, and that this job would give Sarah the resources to do both. She said that she was ready to start immediately, that she would do whatever it took to keep Marcus safe, and that the people threatening him would find out very quickly that they had made a serious mistake if they tried to act on their threats. That mistake, that decision by the criminal organization to target Marcus Blackwell and underestimate the woman he would hire to protect him, would end up costing them far more than money. It would cost him their freedom, their organization, and in some cases, their lives. But before we get to that, we need to understand exactly how Sarah Mitchell went from being Captain Sarah Chen, one of the most decorated female special forces operators in recent military history, to a woman working 3 jobs in Chicago and trying out for a bodyguard position like she had something to prove. We need to go back 8 years, to a desert in Syria where Sarah's old life ended and her new one began, to understand what shaped her into the weapon that Marcus Blackwell had just hired, and that the criminal organization targeting him was completely unprepared to face. 8 years ago, Sarah Chen was 24 years old and already a rising star in the Special Forces community, one of the first women to successfully complete the training and earn a place in an operational unit. She had grown up in Seattle, the daughter of a Chinese immigrant father and an Irish-American mother, raised in a working-class neighborhood where she had learned early to fight for respect and never back down from a challenge. She had joined the Army right out of high school despite her parents' hopes that she would go to college, driven by a need to prove herself and serve something larger than her own life. She had excelled in basic training, been selected for advanced programs, and eventually caught the attention of Special Forces recruiters who saw in her a rare combination of physical capability, tactical intelligence, and the kind of mental toughness that couldn't be taught. Her small frame and unassuming appearance had initially made some of her instructors doubt her, but she had proven herself over and over, outthinking opponents who were bigger and stronger, using speed and technique where others relied on brute force, and showing a gift for close protection work that made her invaluable on missions involving high-value targets. She had met Daniel, her fiancé, during advanced tactical training, and they had bonded over shared experiences and the understanding that only came from people who lived in the shadows and did the things that kept others safe. They had planned to get married after their current deployment cycle ended, had talked about maybe starting a family eventually, about finding a way to balance the life they loved with the normal life they sometimes dreamed about. But that was before Syria, before the mission that intelligence said would be a simple extraction of a diplomat who had been caught in the wrong place when fighting broke out, before they learned too late that the intelligence was wrong and the diplomat was already dead, and the building they were entering was full of enemy combatants who had been waiting for them. Sarah had been the close protection specialist for the team leader that day, positioned to guard him while the others cleared the building, and when the ambush was triggered, she had done exactly what she was trained to do, keeping him alive while hell erupted around them. The firefight had lasted 4 hours, a running battle through streets and buildings as Sarah's unit tried to reach the extraction point, while enemy forces closed in from all sides. She had seen Jackson, the team medic, take a round to the chest and go down, had watched Rodriguez try to drag him to cover only to be hit himself. She had felt the burning pain as shrapnel from a grenade tore into her side, had felt the impact and the wet heat when a bullet grazed her skull and sent blood streaming down her face. She had kept fighting because stopping meant dying, had killed men who were trying to kill her team, had made impossible decisions about who could be saved and who had to be left behind. When extraction finally came, when the helicopter pulled them out of that hell, Sarah had been one of only 4 survivors out of a 12-person team, and she had been covered in blood, some of it hers and some of it from the men she had tried to save. The physical wounds had healed within months, but the psychological ones had cut deeper. The nightmares and the survivor's guilt and the way her brain wouldn't stop running tactical assessments of every room she entered, seeing threats everywhere, unable to turn off the combat mindset even in safe environments. The Army had been supportive at first, providing therapy and medication and time to recover. But eventually, the doctors had told her that she was no longer fit for combat operations, that the PTSD made her a liability, and that her service had been exemplary, but it was time to step back. The honorable discharge had felt like being cut off from the only identity she had known for 6 years, and learning about Daniel's death had shattered what little stability she had left. Finding out she was pregnant had been terrifying and beautiful at the same time, giving her a reason to keep going when she wanted to disappear into the darkness that kept pulling at her. Emma's birth had saved her in ways the Thera Pi never could, giving her something to focus on besides the past, someone who needed her to be strong and present and alive. But being a mother didn't pay the bills, and Sarah had discovered quickly that her military skills didn't translate well to civilian employment, that saying you were trained in combat tactics and weapons handling made employers nervous rather than impressed, that the gaps in her employment history and the PTSD diagnosis made her seem unreliable. She had taken whatever work she could find, jobs that didn't require background checks or questions about her past, waitressing and retail and data entry, moving from Seattle to Portland to Denver, and finally to Chicago, always running from something she couldn't quite name, trying to build a normal life for Emma while feeling like she was suffocating under the weight of being ordinary. She had legally changed her name to Mitchell, her mother's maiden name, partly for the fresh start and partly because she didn't want Emma's teachers or friends' parents Googling her and finding classified mission reports or news articles about the Syria ambush. She had packed away her uniforms and her medals and everything that reminded her of who she used to be, had tried to become Sarah Mitchell, single mom and minimum wage worker, tried to convince herself that the other Sarah, the soldier, was gone forever. But she could still feel that part of herself under the surface, dormant but not dead, waiting for a reason to emerge. And when she had seen the ad for Titan security tryouts, something had clicked into place, a recognition that maybe she didn't have to choose between being a mother and being the operator she had trained to become. Returning to the present, Sarah stood in Marcus Blackwell's office in the Titan security warehouse, having just shared more of her past than she had told anyone in 8 years, and she felt simultaneously exposed and liberated, like a weight had been lifted, but also like she had opened a door she might not be able to close again. Marcus was quiet for a moment after she finished explaining her history, and then he made a decision that would change both their lives. He said that Sarah was hired, effective immediately, at a salary of $250,000 per year plus benefits, housing allowance, and a protection detail for Emma because if Sarah was going to be protecting him, he needed to make sure her daughter was safe so Sarah could focus on her job without distraction. He said that Titan Security would provide her with equipment, training updates on current threat assessments, and backup whenever needed, and that her official title would be Personal Protection Specialist, but her real job would be to keep him alive against people who were very serious about killing him. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes for the first time in years, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being seen, of finally having her skills valued instead of feared, of finally being able to provide for Emma the way she deserved. The first week on the job was intense, a crash course in Marcus's life and schedule and the specific threats facing him. Sarah moved into a secure apartment in Marcus's building, a nice two-bedroom that was the finest place she had lived in years, and Emma's face when she saw her new room with actual furniture and a window that wasn't barred had made every risk worth it. Titan Security provided Sarah with tactical gear, weapons, communication equipment, and access to the full threat intelligence that had been compiled on the criminal organization targeting Marcus. The organization was called the Volkov Group, run by a man named Dmitry Volkov, who operated data theft and ransomware operations that had netted hundreds of millions of dollars before Marcus's company had exposed them. The threats against Marcus had been escalating, and intelligence suggested that Volkov was planning something major, possibly a kidnapping or assassination attempt, within the next few weeks. Sarah absorbed all of this information with the tactical mindset she had thought she'd lost, her brain automatically running scenarios and countermeasures, identifying vulnerabilities in Marcus's routines and implementing changes to reduce his exposure. Her first real test came 2 weeks into the job, when she was escorting Marcus from his downtown office to a dinner meeting at an upscale restaurant in River North. Sarah had studied the route, identified 3 alternate paths, and coordinated with the driver and the backup security team that Titan Security had assigned to work with her. They were 3 blocks from the restaurant when Sarah noticed a black SUV that had been behind them for too long, following their turns too precisely, and her instincts started screaming danger. She told the driver to take the first alternate route, and the SUV followed, confirming her suspicions. She informed Marcus quietly that they had a tail and I were going to lose it, and Marcus tensed but didn't panic, trusting her expertise. Sarah directed the driver through a series of quick turns and then had him pull into an underground parking garage while she called for backup and police support. The SUV tried to follow them into the garage, but Sarah had positioned their car to block the entrance, and when 2 men got out of the SUV looking aggressive, Sarah stepped out to meet them with her hand near her concealed weapon. The confrontation was tense, Sarah standing between the men and Marcus's car, her voice calm but carrying absolute authority as she identified herself as licensed security and informed them that police were 90 seconds away and they needed to leave immediately. One of the men, big and stupid with the overconfidence of someone used to intimidating people, made the mistake of reaching for her, trying to shove her aside, and Sarah's training took over automatically. She redirected his arm, used his momentum against him, and had him on the ground in a control hold in less than 3 seconds, her knee on his back and his arm twisted at an angle that made him cry out in pain. The second man reached for something in his jacket, and Sarah had her weapon out and aimed at him before he could complete the movement, her voice dropping to a deadly calm as she told him to show his hand slowly. The man froze, recognizing the look in her eyes as someone who had aimed weapons at people before and had pulled the trigger, and he raised his hands just as police sirens echoed through the garage, and 3 Chicago PD units came screaming in with lights flashing. The 2 men were arrested, and their SUV was searched, revealing surveillance equipment, photographs of Marcus, and burner phones with messages in Russian that linked them directly to the Volkov Group. The attempted approach had been a reconnaissance mission, testing Marcus's security to find weaknesses before a more serious attempt, and Sarah's quick recognition and response had disrupted their intelligence gathering and forced them to show their hand earlier than planned. Marcus had watched the entire thing from his car, seeing Sarah handle a dangerous situation with a professionalism and competence that was almost scary. And when she returned to the car after giving her statement to police, he had looked at her with new understanding of exactly who he had hired. He said that Derek Stone, the big guy from the tryouts who had been hired as part of the backup team, had been in the support vehicle and had seen the whole thing go down, and that Derek was now telling everyone at Titan Security that Sarah was the real deal, that she had put a guy on the ground who outweighed her by 100 pounds and had drawn on the second guy faster than Derek had even processed the threat. News of the incident spread quickly through Chicago's private security community, and Sarah Mitchell became a name people knew, the former Special Forces operator turned bodyguard who had stopped a Volkov Group surveillance operation and protected one of the city's highest profile targets. But with that recognition came increased danger, because now Volkov knew that Marcus had upgraded his security significantly, that the easy target they had been planning for was now protected by someone with real skills. The threats escalated from surveillance to direct attempts, a package bomb that Sarah identified and had the bomb squad disarm, a poisoning attempt at a restaurant that Sarah caught because she noticed the waiter's hands shaking and his eyes avoiding contact, a staged car accident that was supposed to make Marcus's driver swerve into oncoming traffic, but that Sarah recognized from the positioning of the vehicles. Each time, Sarah's training and instincts kept Marcus safe, and each time, the Volkov Group became more frustrated and more desperate. The situation came to a head 6 months into Sarah's employment, when FBI intelligence indicated that Volkov himself was coming to Chicago to personally oversee a final attempt on Marcus's life, that he was tired of his people failing and was going to handle it himself with a team of professional killers. The FBI wanted to use Marcus as bait to draw Volkov out, to catch him in the act and finally dismantle his organization, and they asked if Marcus would be willing to maintain his normal schedule while they set up surveillance and tactical teams to respond when Volkov made his move. It was dangerous, potentially deadly, and completely dependent on Sarah's ability to keep Marcus alive long enough for the FBI to intervene. Marcus asked Sarah directly if she could do it, if she could protect him against a coordinated assault by professional killers, and Sarah thought about Emma, about the life they had built, about the fact that this job had given her back her purpose and her identity. And she said yes, she could do it, but she needed full tactical authority and the ability to make decisions. Irons without second guessing. The FBI agreed to Sarah's terms, and they spent a week preparing, running through scenarios, identifying likely attack vectors, positioning resources. The trap was set around a charity gala that Marcus was scheduled to attend, a high-profile event with hundreds of guests and multiple entry and exit points, exactly the kind of chaotic environment that would provide cover for an assassination attempt. Sarah coordinated with the FBI tactical team, with Titan security backup including Derek Stone and 3 other operators she trusted, and with local police who would provide perimeter security. She had studied everything about Dmitry Volkov, his background as former Russian military intelligence, his tactical preferences, his psychological profile that suggested he was arrogant and overconfident, believing his reputation made him untouchable. She planned for everything, multiple layers of security and backup plans for the backup plans. But she knew from experience that no plan survived first contact with the enemy, that something unexpected would happen, and she would have to adapt in the moment. The night of the gala arrived, and Marcus attended in a custom tuxedo with Sarah at his side, in formal attire that concealed body armor and 3 weapons, her eyes constantly scanning the crowd while maintaining the appearance of a professional assistant. The first 3 hours passed without incident, Marcus making speeches and meeting with donors while Sarah tracked every face and every movement, her earpiece feeding her updates from the FBI team positioned throughout the building. Then at 11:15 p.m., Sarah spotted him, Dmitry Volkov himself, moving through the crowd with the confidence of someone who belonged there, wearing an expensive suit and a fake smile, heading directly toward Marcus. Sarah's hand moved to her concealed weapon, and she informed the FBI team that the target was in play, moving to intercept, but Volkov was faster than she expected, producing a weapon from inside his jacket and aiming it at Marcus from 15 feet away, while two of his men created chaos by firing shots into the ceiling, sending the crowd into a screaming panic. Sarah moved on pure instinct, her body covering Marcus and taking them both to the ground while drawing her weapon, and she felt the impact as Volkov's first shot hit her in the back, stopped by her body armor but still knocking the wind from her lungs. She returned fire from the ground, her shots precise despite the pain, hitting one of Volkov's men in the shoulder and forcing Volkov himself to take cover behind a pillar. The FBI tactical team was rushing in, but they were still 30 seconds away, and in a gunfight 30 seconds was a lifetime. Sarah pushed Marcus toward cover behind the overturned buffet table and moved to engage Volkov's team, using the panicking crowd as concealment while systematically neutralizing threats. She shot the second gunman in the leg, dropping him, and then she was facing Volkov himself as he came around the pillar, his weapon raised, and his face twisted with rage at this woman who had disrupted his perfect plan. They fired simultaneously, Sarah's training and experience giving her the split-second edge that made the difference, her shot hitting Volkov in the chest while his went wide, missing her by inches. Volkov went down hard, his weapon clattering across the marble floor, and Sarah was on him in seconds, kicking the weapon away and checking him for other threats while calling for medical. The FBI team arrived and secured the scene, arresting Volkov's surviving men and securing the perimeter. And when Sarah finally stood up and looked around, she saw Marcus safe behind the table, shaken but unharmed, and she felt the adrenaline start to fade, replaced by the shaking and the nausea that always came after combat. Derek Stone reached her first, having been part of the backup team that had come rushing in when the shooting started, and he looked at Sarah with awe and said that he had never seen anyone move that fast or shoot that accurately under pressure, that she had just taken down one of the most wanted criminals in the world while protecting her client and managing a chaotic active shooter situation. The aftermath was intense, hours of debriefing with the FBI and local police, medical checks for Sarah's bruised ribs where Volkov's shot had hit her armor, and eventually, finally, being cleared to go home. Marcus had stayed with her through all of it, refusing to leave until he knew she was okay, and when they were finally alone in the car heading back to his building, he had turned to her with tears in his eyes and said simply thank you, that she had saved his life and he would never forget it. Sarah, exhausted and hurting and feeling the weight of having taken a life again after years of trying to leave that behind, had just nodded, unable to find words for the complex emotions churning inside when she got back to her apartment, Emma was asleep in her bed, safe and unaware of how close she had come to losing her mother, and Sarah had stood in the doorway watching her daughter breathe for a long time before finally allowing herself to cry, releasing the fear and the trauma and the relief in quiet sobs that shook her whole body. Dmitry Volkov survived his gunshot wound and was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison after cooperating with authorities to dismantle his organization. The Volkov group was destroyed, its assets seized, and its members arrested across 3 continents, and Marcus Blackwell was finally safe, the threats against him ending when the people making those threats were all in custody. Sarah became something of a legend in the private security world, the bodyguard who had single-handedly stopped a coordinated assassination attempt and protected her client against overwhelming odds. Titan Security offered her a promotion to training director, wanting her to teach others her skills, but Sarah turned it down, preferring to stay in the field, to keep doing the work that made her feel alive and purposeful. Marcus increased her salary to $350,000 and gave her a bonus that allowed her to buy a house in a good neighborhood with a yard where Emma could play. And for the first time in 8 years, Sarah felt like she could breathe, like the pieces of her life had finally come together into something whole. She continued working as Marcus's primary bodyguard for the next 2 years, building a relationship with him that went beyond professional to something like genuine friendship, a mutual respect between two people who had been through hell together and come out stronger. Emma thrived in her new school, making friends and joining soccer, and talking about wanting to be strong like her mom when she grew up. And Sarah had to have difficult conversations about what mommy's job really meant and why it was important to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. She stayed in touch with Derek Stone and some of the other Titan security operators, becoming part of a community of people who understood the life, who didn't judge her for her past or her skills, but valued her for exactly who she was. She started speaking at veteran events and women in security conferences, talking about her journey from special forces to single motherhood to bodyguard, inspiring others who thought their past disqualified them from their future. And sometimes, late at night when Emma was asleep and the house was quiet, Sarah would think back to that day in the warehouse when she had walked in wearing worn sneakers and discount store clothes, when men like Derek Stone had laughed at her and dismissed her as someone who didn't belong, when she had been 3 months behind on rent and desperate enough to try anything. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, to believing that she really was just Sarah Mitchell, the struggling single mom with nothing special about her. And she thought about the moment when she had dropped that biggest guy on the sparring mat, when she had shown everyone watching that underestimating her was a mistake they would never make again. That moment had been the beginning of everything, the point where she had stopped running from who she was and started embracing it, where she had realized that her past didn't define her limits, but rather revealed her capabilities. She thought about Marcus asking her who she really was, and about the decision to finally tell the truth, to stop hiding behind the facade of normal, and accept that she would never be ordinary. That extraordinary was built into her DNA, and forged through experiences that most people couldn't imagine surviving. She thought about the feeling of putting on tactical gear again, of holding a weapon and knowing exactly how to use it, of moving through the world with the confidence that came from genuine capability rather than false bravado. And most of all, she thought about Emma, about the life she had been able to give her daughter because she had been brave enough to walk into that warehouse and demand to be taken seriously, to prove that a single mom in worn sneakers could be just as dangerous and just as valuable as any man in expensive tactical gear. The men who had smirked at her that day had learned a lesson that Sarah hoped would stay with them, that you can't judge someone's capabilities by their appearance or their circumstances, that the person you dismiss might be the most dangerous one in the room, and that underestimating a mother fighting for her child's future was possibly the biggest mistake you could make. Derek Stone certainly learned it, and he became one of Sarah's strongest supporters, telling anyone who would listen about the day he had laughed at a woman in a hoodie and then watched her demonstrate skills that put everyone else to shame. The other candidates netted when they saw Sarah get hired for a position most of them had wanted, and the Volkov group learned it the hardest way possible when the bodyguard they had dismissed as an obstacle turned out to be a former Special Forces operator who had survived worse than anything they could throw at her. Years later, when Sarah was 38 and Emma was 13 and starting to ask questions about self-defense and whether she could learn to be strong like her mom, Sarah would sometimes pull out the video that someone had recorded at those tryouts, the footage of her facing off against Chen on the sparring mat, moving with speed and precision that had shocked everyone watching. She would show it to Emma and explain that strength wasn't about size or muscle, that it was about training and discipline, and the willingness to stand up even when everyone around you expected you to fall. She would tell Emma about walking into that warehouse knowing she was being judged and dismissed, about using their underestimation as a weapon, about the satisfaction of proving every single doubter wrong. And Emma would watch her mother in that video, seeing the confidence and the skill and the quiet determination, and she would understand that her mom wasn't just a bodyguard or a former soldier, but someone who had refused to let circumstances define her, who had fought for every opportunity, and who had built an extraordinary life from the ruins of a broken past. The story of Sarah Mitchell became one that was told in private security training courses and veteran support groups, a reminder that your past didn't have to limit your future, that skills and experience could overcome prejudice and doubt, and that the person everyone underestimated might be the one who changed everything. And for Sarah herself, every time she escorted Marcus to a meeting or a gala, every time she scanned a crowd for threats and kept someone safe, every time she came home to Emma and their house and the stable life she had built, she remembered that it all started with 5 seconds on a sparring mat. 5 seconds where she had left the strongest man in the room on the ground and shown everyone watching exactly who they were dealing with. Those 5 seconds had cost Derek Stone his arrogance, had cost the other candidates their certainty, and had eventually cost the Volkov group their freedom and their lives. But for Sarah, those 5 seconds had been worth everything, because they had given her back herself, had proven that Captain Sarah Chen hadn't died in Syria but had just been waiting for the right moment to emerge, and that when she did, she was unstoppable.